All right, welcome at this panel at the Microsoft Tech Summit. I'm here with a couple of folks that can give us some perspectives on this new cloud world, the DevOps perspective. Can you introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Seth Juarez. I'm a cloud developer advocate. I work in the AI and ML space, and so I help developers be successful in the cloud with AI.
My name is Abel. I'm also a cloud developer advocate. My area of specialty is around DevOps, and I write code. I eat, drink, live writing code, and I've been doing it for 20 odd years, and it's what I love to do.
Hi, I'm Pascal Naber, Azure MVP, en ik werk bij Xpirit als Azure Cloud Consultant.
Well, welcome all three. So we have an MVP and two cloud developer advocates. The title of the panel is Cloud Infra and Apps. It's a DevOps world. I heard you said, Abel, I live for DevOps. What is DevOps? How should we view this new world?
Well, if you ask 10 different people what DevOps is, you're probably going to get 20 different answers, right? But at Microsoft, DevOps means something very specific to us. So DevOps is the union of people, process, and products to enable the continuous delivery of value to our end users. So notice I said that carefully. I didn't just say continuously deliver code, because that doesn't do a thing, right? That's just piles of code. And I didn't even say continuously deliver features, because we can deliver feature after feature after feature, but if it's not what our end users need, what's the point? So we need to make sure that we're continuously delivering value to our end users.
Right, and but we do see in the field that a lot of customers and companies wanting to do DevOps to say we're going to implement DevOps. And what you're saying is you need to look at three ways. So it's people, process, product, if you will. Then those are the things they need to consider to get into this motion, into this new way of working.
Absolutely. So I'll just tell a little story. At Microsoft, and I can only speak about the VSTS team. That's the team that I'm with, or was with. We used to deliver software as a box software. Once every 3 years, we would give a new version of TFS out. And we were very waterfall-like. And what we realized about 7-8 years ago, we were getting out-innovated by our competitors. And we didn't want to become obsolete, so we were like, we have to buy into this DevOps mindset. But it's very difficult to go from delivering a box product once every 3 years to this DevOps world where you're continually delivering value. So what we realized is we had to address all three of those pillars, right? The people, the process, and the products that help enable all of this. The people portion undoubtedly was the most difficult portion to address. That's cultural change that has to happen from the top all the way down, where everyone needs to buy into the mindset of we need to continually deliver value, right? The old way of doing project management, of having Gantt charts and things like that, they don't make any sense whatsoever in this new DevOps world. So it had to start from the top all the way to the bottom to the devs. And even for us devs, it was a shocking change as well, because I remember back when I first started, I would grab a user story, implement it, and throw it over the fence. I'm done, right? I'm out. But now I'm responsible for quality as well. So I have to write unit tests. I have to write automated UI tests. I couldn't just say, oh, that's QA's problem. It's everyone's problem now.
That's a good point. And what I also like to mention is what I see at a lot of companies, certainly the large enterprises, is that the teams are horizontally scaled. So you have a data team and a web team and an infrastructure team. What we see very often is that those teams, they are complaining that they think they are applying DevOps, but they can't get out what they want from it. So yeah, we come there for advice, and what we see is that the teams are not optimized for this DevOps process. So what you see for DevOps is that the whole team has to be self-contained. They have to build, to design, build, and to deliver the software and be responsible for it from the beginning to the end. And that is something major. And I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that companies are making now.
Yeah, I think that what you're seeing is they're focusing on the third P products, while they mostly might ignore some of the people and process, and they need to have maybe another team structure. What's your view to this, Seth? What do you think they need to do to get that?
So I think you're not going to go out and be like, I'm going to go buy DevOps and put it in my we're DevOps now. We bought it and now we're done. Good job, everybody. I don't think that's it, really. I think DevOps is more of a cultural change in what you are trying to deliver. And I like the whole status of that we're trying to deliver value continuously, and it's a union of people, process, and products, right? And we say the same thing because we work together, right? And I understand what this is, but the first thing we need to do is we need to decide, can we deliver value quickly to our customers? That's what we want to do. Yes, that means we might need to change the way we're organized. It might need to change the way we think about what is value to our customers, and it's going to change the way we either save our code or whatever process we have to deliver products out. It's going to change fundamentally everything that we do, and so it's not something that you buy, it's something that you become, I think.
And so what you're saying is you need to do it with the end goal in mind and really bring that change to your company.
So I think you made a great point about having a self-contained team, because if you look at how we used to build software traditionally, not just Microsoft, but everybody, we built them in layers, right? You had the data layer, you had a UI layer, you had the back-end coders, and we needed 6 months of coding because each layer had to finish before the next layer could even do something. Or there was so much integration time between the two different layers. And in this new DevOps world where we need to continuously deliver value, a lot of times our sprints are 2 weeks long, maybe even 1 week long. At that point, we can't wait for an entire layer to be designed and then finished. So as developers, we have to stop designing in layers and designing in slices. So for one team, we're going to design just enough of the database and the schema of what we need to do and of the API that we need, right? You don't have to design the entire thing out first, you just design everything by slices. That was a big mindset shift for a lot of our dev teams.
Okay, so DevOps is not only about organization, but also about technical stuff. The ops is coming to the devs. Devs are doing more ops. What does this mean? To be concrete, well, Azure makes it possible to automatically deploy infrastructure. And Azure is facilitating this with ARM templates, for example. So that could be a first good step for a team to automate the infrastructure in your DevOps team with ARM templates.
And when you're talking automating infrastructures, people talk a lot about things like infra as code, CI/CD pipelines. To some of the infrastructure folks that might be new, some of the developers might already be used to these terms. Are those things you see as part of something successful to come to a DevOps motion?
It's vital when it comes to a DevOps world, right? So the ultimate DevOps nirvana is we get to describe our infrastructure right alongside our code. However you describe it, right? Whether it's with chef recipes, whether it's with ARM templates. I want ARM templates. I want everyone Azure, of course. But in the DevOps, you want to describe your infrastructure, store it in source control right alongside your code. So this way, everything gets versioned together, right? Just like we're able to store the schema of our database alongside our code, we now have the ability to store what the infrastructure will be. So at any point in time, we can grab whatever's in source control, deploy the app, the database schema, and also the infrastructure. Right? That's the ultimate end goal. Azure makes it very easy to do that.
It does. Now you said, Seth, you're quite focused on AI and things like ML and so forth.
Correct.
What are perspectives from that world? Are there some other things?
Man, it's a mess, right? So right now, here, hold my drink. Right now, the problem with AI is in traditional code, you're worried about source control, and you have some artifacts about infrastructure. In AI, you have source control, you have model parameterization, models and also data sourcing and shape. So you have like 3 or 4 things that you need to worry about in AI that really we are building systems to handle that, but there is no way to actually, with AI, to continuously deliver something well. And so you have to be very focused. So for example, there is. We have stuff. I'm going to tell you the story of what we have now. But once you start getting into the DevOps mindset and you understand that with AI you're deploying models, an example is I was working on some research code that generates pictures of birds. That you describe a bird and the computer will draw it for you, right? Which is pretty crazy. I didn't write it, but I had to go into the research code, and in order to make it actually sane, so that I could deploy this whenever I wanted, I pulled out the code, I containerized it, so that it would work in a container, and then I pushed it up to ACR, which is Azure Container Registry, and then I pulled it into a web app. And so now I have this really good continuous pipeline that I can set up. So for example, they just told me, hey, we want this code now to return 6 pictures of birds that it thinks it's going to draw. So now what I do is I go into the code that I had, I change it, I rebuild the container, push it to ACR, and now everything's starting to flow. So notice that even with AI, where there's a lot of messiness, I have to start thinking about how do I deliver this value quickly. And so now when they said I want this change, I'm not affected by it at all. I just change the code, I test it locally on a container, and then I push it up. But I'll tell you that you have to be cognizant of the DevOps mindset. Otherwise, you're going to have a bunch of model files somewhere in a directory. You're going to have a bunch of code somewhere in some other directory. And then you're going to be like, I don't know what's going on. We spent all this money on data scientists. They built all this stuff, and we don't even know where to put it or how to move it. And so you have to think about these things in a DevOps perspective, because data scientists generally write the worst code I've ever seen, right? And I say that being a data scientist, right? Because we don't write code to make stuff. We write code to prove stuff. And once it's proved, we give it to people like me that I have to go through and fix it and then put it into a CI/CD type pipeline.
Nice. Now, Pascal, you've been in the field for a couple of years. You're an Azure MVP. A lot of Microsoft professionals here today and tomorrow. And I've heard a lot of terminology already. VSTS, CI/CD pipelines, ACR, containers. What are the things people should start looking at if they want to be successful in this area?
What we see in the market is many customers of us are using Team Foundation Server, but are already shifting or already have shifted to VSTS. We think it's a great tool which supports DevOps to teams completely. So you have your code in there, you have your work items in there, your automated build and your release pipelines. And you talked about containers. Containers are also a possibility. It doesn't need to be used in a DevOps environment, but it is really great to use them.
Those are the things they should look at. Now, I've heard quite a bit of things about continuous already. Continuous this, continuous that. I think such a CI/CD pipeline is an example of a continuous motion, and I think VSTS is on the front end of those things. Where do you start? How do you take this one step further? How do we get to a CI/CD pipeline?
It depends, right? Just like everything else in our industry, it depends on where you are at currently. So what we always tell customers when we're talking to them is, you need to start where it hurts the most, right? So I had a session on DevOps earlier, and somebody asked me, where do you start? The first question I asked them is, do you guys use source control, or are you just using a file share, or what? He's like, no, we don't even use source control yet. Okay, if you don't use source control, that's a good place to start, right? Let's get your code into source control. The important thing is, don't try to do everything at once. There's no way you can do everything at once. So pick one thing. Pick one thing that hurts the most and do that. Use source control. Once you get that going, then start asking, how are we building this application? Are we still building on the dev's desktop and then zipping it and putting it someplace? And if you are, there are better ways, right? Let's build a continuous integration system where every time someone checks in code, it will kick off a build. And so you just start attacking things one thing at a time, what hurts the most. And a lot of organizations, they already have automated builds. They have source control systems. But where they're feeling pain right now is their automated deployments. And they might even have some form of automation in place, but we all have that place where it gets to a certain point and you're like, uh-oh, I don't know if it's going to break or not. Because usually, if something bad happens, this is where it happens, right? So if you have that feeling, that's where you should attack it. That's where you should look at a system like VSTS and see if we can automate it better, so it does become an uh-oh situation, but just, oh, great, it's just another part of the pipeline.
Right. Now, if I talk to infrastructure people, you often get remarks like, hey, but we also worry about things like security, things like data protection, all sorts of things. From this new cloud world in DevOps, how do we make sure we handle all of those requirements that enterprises and their departments have? Do you want to do this, Seth?
Well, it turns out in Azure, we have like our own networking. I don't know if you know this, but we have endpoints everywhere. And so as soon as you get into our Azure infrastructure, we have like our own private internet with wires coming from the top of Spain into Virginia, right? And so once you get in there, you're pretty safe. On top of that, we have virtual networking that allows you to do almost everything that an infrastructure person would do. And so you can set up a VNet, right? You can set up a security on a VNet. You can say anything you would do in a router. And so what I would argue is that in the cloud, now you're able to specify the kinds of things you would specify for hardware, but specify it for software. Then it could be part of your entire deployment. So let's say, for example, you want to set up this entire infrastructure. You can specify it all in an ARM template. Or I think does it work with Chef nowadays? It works with Chef nowadays, and so you can provide a recipe. And you can stand up an environment that an IT person would be proud of, because they would say, this is how I would set it up if it was all a real thing. And so just because we're in the cloud doesn't mean we discard our notions of what IT security is or what infrastructure security is. In fact, you take those notions and you put them into the cloud. And you can specify this with recipes and ARM templates.
So I just want to add to this as well, because clearly security is extremely important, especially in a DevOps pipeline, right? So back in the day when we used to deploy once every 3 years, we could take 6 weeks or maybe even longer at the tail end to have a security review. Okay, 3 years might be an exaggeration, but let's say we push out to production 2 times a year, so every 6 months. So even at that cadence, there's plenty of time to break out and say, you know what, we're going to spend this X amount of weeks to do a security check. In this new DevOps world where potentially every developer check-in could flow into production, in this type of world, we don't have that time where you spend 6 weeks doing security checks. So what that means is we have to shift left. Just like with the quality of code, we don't have time to spend 6 months doing end-to-end functional testing. So we shifted left. Now we're going to build quality into our code as we're building it. We're going to build security into our code as we're building it. So every single check-in, we can have security checks, whether it's code scanning, or whether it's a human person looking at the infrastructure, checking it off, making sure everything is okay. So it has to be built into the pipeline. Every developer check-in will kick this off.
Right, and if you look, I think, at what Microsoft's doing at Azure, a lot of efforts going into governance, a lot of hooks and pieces going into ARM, and you already said, Pascal, that ARM is almost basic knowledge by now that you need to have, and you can leverage those things to really make sure everything's safe going forward with applications deploy, right?
Yes, use indeed RM for that. Although RM is not easy. It has a deep learning curve, a higher learning curve. So the persons who are doing that will be busy with that quite long in the first place. But if you have it, it's worth $1 million. What we see now at Microsoft is that the CLI tools are being a major step also for DevOps. So, for example, the AKS team, they have a higher priority for CLI than for RM templates. And RM is not the only thing that you can do. At the end, the ultimate goal is to automate everything. And what you said, do that step by step, and that's the message.
And that's why you say Azure CLI could be a stepping stone. You could be all the way into VSTS or Visual Studio, but ARM gives you at least the power to get there and to get to that automation. If you look at the new world, you see Microsoft embracing a lot of open source, and I think open source has a good play in this world, especially in AI, of course, and but also in other areas like build automation and so forth. You see people using Jenkins and other wonderful stuff. You already said Chef. What's your view on how open source can add to this party?
I love open source. So, Microsoft loves open source. If you use your open source DevOps tools and it goes into Azure, I love you guys, all of you, right? That's really all that matters is that you go into Azure. I'm part of the VSTS team, so of course I'm always going to be pushing VSTS and how wonderful it is and blah, 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 all that stuff. But really it doesn't matter. Azure is an open platform. We have plenty of customers that use Jenkins for their CI. Maybe they use Spinnaker for their release management tool, right? It really doesn't matter. Any of these tools can work, can get you into Azure, and that's all that matters. In fact, my team, we specialize on DevOps, not on VSTS. I specialize on VSTS, but the team specializes on DevOps. And our charter is to help our customers use DevOps best practices to get into Azure, no matter what your tools are.
Right, and I think, Seth, in your world of data, big data, AI, ML, and so forth, there is a lot of open source by default. Almost.
Yeah, I was at a conference last week in Israel, and I got up and was giving a session on deep learning and showing TensorFlow. And a dude raised his hand. He's like, hey, Seth, why aren't you showing CNTK? I'm like, well, because people use TensorFlow. And I don't care what you use, as long as those clock cycles are in my cloud. So you can run whatever you want. We just have to make it easy, and it has to make it easy for you to put it into the cloud. And that's really what our goal is. I don't care what you run, as long as you use our clock cycles and our storage. If we can make that easy, if we can make that process good for you, then that's what we want.
Right, makes sense. We've talked a lot about Azure. There's also something called Azure Stack. And there might be a situation where Azure Stack applies and customers will be using those. Will we have the same DevOps experience going forward in those situations? That's something you guys can comment to?
Yes, absolutely. So Azure Stack, in case you guys don't know, the quick story is you can run Azure on your own infrastructure. It's a little bit more than that, but the end result is you can have Azure in your own infrastructure. So all the DevOps practices that we preach, you can still do that inside of Azure Stack.
You have to buy servers from Dell, Lenovo, or HP. Those parties can supply the servers that run Azure Stack. Azure Stack is not the full Azure cloud, but there is a very good begin, and that way the major companies can embrace the Azure cloud without using the public Azure cloud.
Makes sense. And one of the things I wanted to ask you, Pascal, is you're based here in Holland. A lot of people today and tomorrow wanting to learn about DevOps and Azure, as we already saw. Are you aware of any other initiatives, like community initiatives, user groups, perhaps also online properties where people can go to really talk a bit more about what we're talking about today and learn about DevOps, Azure, and all this good stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. If you take a look at DevOps, there are multiple meetups also here in Amsterdam, but also Azure meetup. I'm one of the organizers, so that's cool. But you can get knowledge on a free base at night after work time. So there are many possibilities for that.
Cool. Well, I invite everybody to look at those. We have a couple of minutes left. Do we want to do some final remarks on DevOps, Azure? Anything you want to share with this audience before we start closing this panel? Seth, you want to give some final remarks?
Yeah. Our goal as developers and engineers is to deliver value, and anything we can do to make that happen faster, we should do that. And I love how Abel said, "Where's your pain point? Start there, move up, move forward."
So DevOps is absolutely vital in the world that we're in today. Clearly, I want everyone in Azure and I want people to use VSTS. But even if you have nothing to do with Microsoft, if you're in software, DevOps is vital. If you are not implementing DevOps, if you're not buying into the DevOps mindset, just remember this. Your competitors either have or they will. And when they do, they will render you obsolete. And nobody wants to be obsolete.
Okay, and what I want to tell you is DevOps is not only about technique, also about organization. And furthermore, work with the tooling and not against the tooling.
Okay, good. Well, thank you guys for your time. Thank you, Seth, Abel, and Pascal. I think we learned a ton about DevOps, Azure, VSTS, continuous motions, the 3 Ps about people, process, and product. And well, thank you and enjoy your MS Tech Summit.
Thank you all.